The clock hands were showing 4:30 when I put the red pen away and rubbed my tired eyes. The last 7th grade algebra test had been checked, and I wasn't happy with the results. Out of 28 students, only 5 of them coped with the tasks at a decent level. The rest clearly didn't understand how to solve equations with one variable, even though we'd been studying the subject for a week. I neatly stacked the notebooks and put them in the top drawer of my desk. The school's math room had long since become my second home. For 30 years, I had taught here, at the municipal school number 7 in our small town of Puerto Montt. Hundreds of children had passed through my hands over the years, many of whom were now parents themselves and brought their offspring to me. As I packed my bag, I glanced at the picture on the table. Raoul was smiling at me from that picture, taken 3 years before his death. My husband was an engineer at the local fish processing factory, a hard-working and reliable man. When he passed away 5 years ago, I thought life was over. But it turned out it had just changed. Raoul left me a small house and decent savings that he had saved up all his life. My teacher's salary allowed me to live modestly but decently, and his inheritance gave me some financial freedom. I locked the office and headed for the exit. The hallways were quiet, with only the voices of the janitorial staff somewhere in the distance. I liked this time of day, when the hustle and bustle of school was quiet, and I could reflect on the day. Today's 9th grade class was going particularly hard. Marisa Contreras, one of my students, was clearly going through some family problems. The girl was capable, but for the past few weeks she had been sitting in a detached manner and hardly answering questions. I would need to talk to her after school tomorrow. Leaving the school, I headed toward El Rocio Café. Paloma was already waiting for me at our usual table by the window. My friend worked as a nurse at the local clinic, and we had agreed to meet every Friday after work. It was a tradition started a year ago when Paloma was going through a particularly difficult period in her marriage. "Amelia, finally." Paloma waved her hand. I had already ordered coffee for us. I sat down across from my friend and looked at her face carefully. Paloma looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. Her usually neatly styled brown hair was carelessly pulled back into a ponytail. "How's it going?" I asked, though I could tell from the look on her face that she wasn't doing so well. "Same as usual." Paloma shrugged. "Manuel came home drunk again last night. The neighbors complained that he was making noise in the yard at 12:30 at night, trying to start the motorcycle. Barely got him inside." The waitress brought us coffee and small cookies. I added some sugar to the cup, stirring it slowly. Manuel, Paloma's husband, worked as a mechanic at a car service center. He had once been a cheerful and outgoing guy, but in recent years he had been increasingly addicted to the bottle. Paloma agonized with him, but did not dare to divorce. "And what does he say at work?" I asked, still silent. But I know that Rodrigo, the owner of the service, has already reprimanded him several times. I'm afraid he'll be fired soon. "And what will we do then? My salary as a nurse is just enough to cover food and utilities." I nodded, understanding my friend's problem. There were few jobs in our town, and it was almost impossible to find a new place after being fired for drunkenness. The men either worked at fish processing plants or in the service industry for the tourists who came here to admire the lakes and volcanoes. "Maybe we should try to have a serious talk with him," I suggested. "When he's sober, of course." "I've talked to him 100 times." Paloma waved her hand. "He swears he's going to stop drinking. He stays sober for a week, 2 weeks at the most, and then it starts all over again. Yesterday he told me he was stressed at work and that I should understand him. Understand, as if I have less stress when I'm on my feet in the hospital for 10 hours every day." We sat and drank coffee, watching the sparse passers-by on the street. Friday was overcast, low clouds hanging over the city, promising rain by evening. In this weather, I wanted to get home, make some tea, and sit in a chair with a book. "How are you doing?" Paloma asked, clearly trying to change the subject. "How are the sons?" "Leonardo is fine, working in the mayor's office, helping to process documents for citizens. He says the work is boring, but stable." "And Esteban?" I paused. "Seems to be doing well, too. He works as a manager at the bank, and he and Jimena live together as friends. I help them with the mortgage, you know." "It's good that you can help." Paloma nodded. It's very hard for young families now. Housing prices are so high that you can't buy an apartment on your own. It was true. Esteban and Jimena had been saving for a down payment for 3 years, and their mortgage payments amounted to almost half of their total income. I gave them $300 every month, which made their lives much easier. Raul's money allowed me to do this without hurting my own budget. Jimena worked as a proofreader for the local newspaper, the Puerto Montt News. Her salary was small, but she dreamed of becoming a real writer. In the evenings, she sat at her computer, writing stories that she sent to literary magazines. So far, without much success, but she didn't give up. Esteban was sympathetic to her hobby, although sometimes I noticed that he got tired of her constant talk about literature and creativity. "Is Jimena still writing her stories?" Paloma asked. "Yes, very actively. Last week she told me that she sent a new story to some magazine in the capital. She hopes very much that they will publish it." "It's good that a person has a dream," said Paloma. "Though it's a long way from dream to reality." We finished our coffee and ordered another cup. At a neighboring table sat 2 elderly women discussing the latest city news. One of them, Senora Lopez, worked in the mayor's office and knew all the gossip. I tried not to listen to their conversation, but I did hear what they were saying about the new director of the fish processing plant who had fired 5 workers. The phone in my bag rang. I apologized to Paloma and pulled out the receiver. Esteban's name lit up on the display. "Mom, hi!" My son's voice sounded cheerful. "How are you? How was work?" "I'm fine, son. I just came from work. I'm sitting with Paloma in a cafe. How are you?" "We're great. Listen, Mom, Jimena and I wanted to invite you and Leonardo to dinner on Saturday. We have some big news we want to share with the family." I frowned. The words "important news" could mean anything. Maybe Jimena had finally gotten pregnant? Or her story had been accepted for publication? Or maybe Esteban got a promotion at the bank? What news? I couldn't resist asking. "I won't tell you over the phone," Esteban laughed. "Come tomorrow at 7 o'clock, okay? I already called Leonardo. He will come." "Okay, I'll be there. What can I make? Maybe a pie." "You don't have to cook anything, Mom. Jimena will do it herself. Just come over." After the conversation was over, I put my phone in my bag. Paloma looked at me with curiosity. "Esteban's inviting me to a family dinner," I explained. "He said they had big news." "I wonder what kind of news?" Paloma smiled. "Maybe you'll be expecting grandchildren soon?" "I don't know. Esteban intrigues. Tomorrow I'll find out." We sat in the cafe for another half an hour, discussing small things. Paloma told about the new doctor who came to work at the clinic, and I shared my problems with grades in 7th grade. When it started to drizzle, we decided to split up. "I'll see you next week," Paloma said, buttoning her jacket. "And tell me what news Esteban has." I said goodbye to my friend and headed home. On the way, I decided to stop at Don Carlos's store to buy something for dinner tomorrow. Even though Esteban had asked me not to bring anything, I couldn't come empty-handed. Don Carlos, an elderly man with a gray mustache, had run a small grocery store in our neighborhood for 30 years. He knew everyone in the neighborhood and was always interested in their business. "Good evening, Mrs. Amelia," he greeted me. "How are you doing in school?" "Good evening, Don Carlos. It's business as usual. The children are learning, some better, some worse." I walked down the narrow aisles between the shelves, picking out groceries. I picked up a bottle of good red wine that Esteban liked, a bag of candy, and fresh fruit. In the refrigerator was a great cheese that came from a neighboring town. I bought a small piece. I knew Jimena liked cheese with wine. As I paid, I asked Don Carlos how his son, who was studying at the university in Santiago, was doing. "He is doing well," the old man replied proudly. "On vacation, he will come and help in the store. He wants to start his own business after university. He says that the future is in internet trading." I nodded, though I didn't really understand what internet trading was. Technology was advancing so fast that people of my generation could hardly keep up. Esteban often laughed at me learning new phone features or trying to figure out online banking. At home, I set my purchases on the kitchen table and made myself some tea. The rain intensified, large drops pounding on the windows. I turned on the floor lamp in the living room and settled into a chair with a cup of tea and a book. I was reading a novel by a contemporary Chilean writer the librarian had recommended to me. The story is about a middle-aged woman starting a new life after the death of her husband. As I contemplated tomorrow's dinner, I wondered what Esteban and Jimena's news might be. The young people had married 2 years ago, and I was really hoping for grandchildren. I didn't rush them into it, though, realizing that they needed to get back on their feet financially first. A mortgage, a job, plans for the future. All this took time and effort. Jimena was an ambitious girl. She often said that she wanted to succeed in literature, to become a famous writer. I admired her determination, although sometimes it seemed that she was a little detached from reality. However, it is typical of youth to dream of great accomplishments. Saturday night, I arrived at Esteban's house at 7 o'clock sharp. The bus took me to their neighborhood in 20 minutes, and I walked the remaining 3 blocks. Their house was a typical 3-story building, built about 10 years ago, specifically for young families with mortgages. Esteban and Jimena's apartment was on the 2nd floor, facing the courtyard, where young eucalyptus trees and a children's swing stood. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear voices and laughter coming from the apartment. Apparently, Leonardo was already there. My youngest son always arrived before the appointed time. It had been his peculiarity since childhood. If they agreed to meet at 7, he would show up at 7:30 and wait patiently for the others. Esteban opened the door before I could even ring the bell. He must have heard my footsteps in the hallway. His son looked unusually animated, his eyes shining with that special sparkle I remembered from his childhood, when he got a good grade in school or managed to build a complicated model from a construction kit. "Mom, I'm so glad you came." He hugged me and took the shopping bag from my hands. "Come in. We were just about to have dinner." The apartment welcomed me with the smell of fried chicken with spices and the sounds of Latin American music playing softly from the speakers. Jimena was an excellent cook, it had to be admitted. She had grown up in a family where her mother ran a small restaurant, and she had been adept with pots and pans since she was a little girl. I'd always appreciated that about her, though sometimes it seemed like she spent too much time experimenting with exotic recipes instead of simple home-cooked meals. Leonardo greeted me in the small living room that combined with the kitchen. His youngest son was sitting on the couch, leafing through a magazine. At my appearance, he got up and kissed me on the cheek. Leonardo was the complete opposite of Esteban, calm, judicious, not prone to impulsive decisions. He was valued at City Hall for those qualities, though he had few career prospects there. "Hi, Mom," he said. Esteban had been impatient for half an hour. "I wonder what news they have that's so important." Jimena came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands with a towel. She was wearing a new dress I hadn't seen before, dark blue, emphasizing her figure. Her hair was neatly styled, which wasn't exactly usual for a home-cooked dinner either. Apparently, tonight was indeed a special night for them. "Amelia, welcome!" Jimena kissed me on both cheeks, as was the custom in her family. "Dinner is almost ready. All that's left is to cook the rice. Please have a seat." I looked around at the familiar surroundings. The 2-room apartment was simple but tasteful. The furniture had been bought gradually, often on credit or on sale. On the walls hung reproductions of paintings by famous artists and a few photos from their wedding. There were books on the shelves, mostly classic literature and modern novels that Jimena read for inspiration. The dining table was set for 4. Jimena took out the best dishes from the cupboard, which were usually used only on holidays. The white tablecloth, beautiful plates with blue ornaments, and wine glasses all created a festive atmosphere. I put the brought wine on the table and arranged the fruit in a vase. "What a fragrance!" I praised as Jimena began to serve the food. "What did you cook?" "Chicken in honey mustard sauce with rosemary," proudly answered my daughter-in-law. "The recipe is from a French cookbook that a friend gave me. And on the side dish, rice with vegetables and spices." Indeed, the chicken looked appetizing. Golden crust, from which came a spicy aroma, rice, decorated with pieces of bell peppers and green peas. Jimena knew how to serve even a simple dish in such a way that it looked like a restaurant dish. Esteban opened the wine I brought and poured it into glasses. "Let's drink to the family," he suggested, raising his glass. "And to the good news we have to share with you." We clinked glasses and I took a small sip. The wine was really good, with a slight acidity and a fruity aftertaste. Leonardo almost didn't drink it, just a taste for decency. He didn't like alcohol at all. We ate in silence for the first few minutes, savoring the delicious food. Jimena was a talented cook after all. The chicken was tender and juicy, the sauce perfectly complemented the meat, and the rice was crumbly and flavorful. I sincerely praised my daughter-in-law, which made her blossom with pleasure. "So what's the news?" Leonardo finally asked, putting aside his fork. "You've been keeping us in suspense for the past hour." Esteban and Jimena looked at each other, and I saw some special understanding flash in their eyes. My son coughed and adjusted his shirt collar, a habit from his childhood when he was nervous before important conversations. "Mom, Leonardo," Esteban began solemnly, "we have a unique opportunity. You might say, the chance of a lifetime." Jimena nodded, supporting her husband. "Yes, this is really something special. We heard about it from Esteban's colleague who works in the investment department of the bank." I felt something inside me squeeze. The words unique opportunity and chance of a lifetime in a financial context usually meant something risky. In my life, I've seen enough people fall for that kind of bait. "It's about investments," Esteban continued, leaning back in his chair. "There is a new company, Alpha Invest, which specializes in high-yield financial instruments. They work with international markets and use modern trading techniques." Leonardo frowned. "What exactly do they offer?" "Imagine," Jimena leaned forward, and her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "They guarantee 30% profit in 6 months. 30%, you know. That means that if you invest $10,000, you'll get $13,000 in 6 months. I put down my fork and looked at my son carefully. Esteban had been working at the bank for 5 years and should have understood the basics of finance better than most people. But I could tell by the look on his face that he believed the story completely. "Esteban," I began cautiously, 30% in 6 months is a lot. More than bank deposits give you in a whole year. Don't you think it's suspicious?" "Mom, you just don't understand modern realities." My son waved his hand. "This is not the 19th century, when money was kept in a stocking under the mattress. Technology makes it possible to earn money that used to be inaccessible to ordinary people." Jimena supported her husband. "Amelia, I respect your experience, but the world has changed a lot. What seemed impossible to our parents is now commonplace. Look at the internet, at cryptocurrencies, at artificial intelligence. Everything is evolving rapidly." I took another sip of wine, thinking about what I'd heard. Leonardo also looked skeptical, but he remained silent for now, letting me do the talking. "Tell me more about this company," I asked. "Where is it registered? Who are the founders? What licenses do they have?" Esteban pulled a colorful brochure from his pocket and placed it on the table. On the cover was the Alpha Invest logo, a stylized Greek letter alpha surrounded by arrows pointing upward. Below it was written in large letters, "Your path to financial independence." "Here, take a look." My son opened the brochure to the first page. The company was founded 2 years ago by a group of experienced traders from Europe and the United States. They have offices in Miami, Panama, and Santiago. They use unique algorithms to trade the currency and commodity markets. I picked up the brochure and flipped through a few pages. Lots of beautiful graphs showing profit growth, pictures of smiling people in business suits, quotes from satisfied clients. The text was full of special terms that sounded impressive, but explained little to the average person. "And what is the minimum investment amount?" Leonardo asked. "Only $5,000, answered Jimena. "This is very democratic. Many similar funds require much more." "And you are going to invest these $5,000? I asked. Esteban and Jimena looked at each other again, and I realized that I was about to say something I didn't like. "Actually," the son said, "we're thinking of a larger sum. My colleague Juan told me that the more you invest, the higher the interest. With an amount of $10,000 or more, they give not 30 but 35%. I felt my heart beat faster. $10,000 was a lot of money for a young family with a mortgage. "Esteban," I tried to keep my tone calm, "do you have $10,000 to spare?" "Well, not quite free," my son admitted, "but we can take out a loan against the security of the apartment. The bank will give us the money at 12% interest, and we'll earn 35 in 6 months. The benefit is obvious. Leonardo shook his head. Esteban, it's a home equity loan. If something goes wrong, you could end up without an apartment. Nothing will go wrong, hotly objected Jimena. We are not playing in a casino. This is a serious investment company with an international reputation. They have all the necessary documents and licenses. I looked at my sister-in-law carefully. Jimena was a smart girl, but sometimes her ambition overshadowed her common sense. She dreamed of quick success, of breaking out of the circle of financial problems and starting to live like the heroes of her favorite novels. Jimena, I turned to her, what if that 35% turns out to be a fraud? What if the company disappears with your money? Amelia, my sister-in-law sighed and set her fork aside. I understand your concerns, but life is a risk. If you're always afraid and do nothing, you'll end up with nothing. Look at successful people. They've all taken risks at some point. Esteban nodded. Mom, I work in a bank. Every day I see people taking out loans for cars, for vacations, for repairs. And we want to take out a loan for an investment that will bring us a profit. It makes sense. But you have a mortgage, I reminded you. You have to pay the bank every month. If the investment doesn't work out, how will you pay off 2 loans at the same time? Mom, don't be so pessimistic, Esteban smiled. In 6 months, we will make such a profit that we can close the loan and still have enough left for a down payment on a bigger house. Jimena supported her husband. Imagine, Amelia, that we will earn that money. We could move to a better neighborhood. I could quit my job at the newspaper and devote myself to writing. We'll have financial freedom. I looked at my son and daughter-in-law sitting across from me with their eyes burning and full of plans for the future. They were so passionate about their idea that they didn't notice the obvious dangers, or didn't want to see them. What does the bank's management think about such investments? Leonardo asked. Surely you have your own investment products. Of course we do, replied Esteban. But their returns are ridiculous, 5 to 7% a year. You can't get rich on that kind of money. But you won't get poor, I said. Jimena looked at me with a slight irritation. Amelia, with such an approach, you can live your whole life in poverty. Teachers are used to small salaries and stability, but the modern world requires other solutions. You have to think big and act boldly. There was a note of superiority in her words that surprised me unpleasantly, but I restrained myself and did not reply sharply. Sunday morning I spent in restless reflection. Yesterday's conversation with my son did not give me peace. Sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, I ran the details of their plan over and over in my head. $10,000 secured against the apartment, 35% profit in 6 months, dreams of financial independence. It all sounded too good to be true. I pulled the Alpha Invest brochure that Esteban had given me the day before out of my bag and scrutinized its contents once more. The glossy pages were full of growth charts, pictures of modern offices, and portraits of smiling people in expensive suits. On one of the pages was a photograph of the company's supposedly main office in Miami, a glass building with the Alpha Invest logo on the facade. The text was full of special terms: forex arbitrage, algorithmic trading, diversified portfolio of derivatives. To someone not versed in finance, this might have sounded convincing. But the more I read, the more questions I had. For example, why would a company that can guarantee such high returns need money from private investors? Why don't they borrow from banks at a lower interest rate? By 11 in the morning, I couldn't stand it anymore and called Paloma. A friend was just about to go to the market for groceries, and we agreed to meet there. The Sunday market in our town was not only a place to shop, but also the center of social life. Here, one could meet acquaintances, find out the latest news, and just socialize. Paloma was waiting for me at the entrance to the market, next to a stall selling fresh flowers. She looked better than she had on Friday. Obviously, the weekend had given her a break from family problems. We said hello and walked slowly between the rows of vendors. So, how was the family dinner? Paloma asked, stopping at the vegetable counter. What news from Esteban? I told my friend about my son's plans while she picked out tomatoes and onions. Paloma listened attentively, sometimes shaking her head or wrinkling her nose at what she heard. When I got to the part about the loan against the apartment, she even stopped and looked at me with concern. "Amelia, this is crazy," she exclaimed. "Mortgaging an apartment for some dubious investment. What if the company turns out to be a fraud?" "That's exactly what I'm thinking," I agreed. But Esteban is fully confident of success. Jimena also supports the idea. They think that I just do not understand modern realities. We went to the counter with fish, where the seller Don Pedro was cutting fresh catch. Paloma bought 2 pieces of salmon for Sunday lunch, and I picked up some shrimp. Talking about financial scams didn't seem to fit with the peaceful atmosphere of the market, but I needed to talk. "What did Leonardo say?" Paloma asked. He was also skeptical, but he did not argue with his brother. "You know Leonardo? He does not like conflict. He only said it was dangerous to risk the apartment. We bought bread at Don Miguel's bakery and sat down on a bench near the fountain in the center of the market square. There were people with bags and carts scurrying around, children running between the stalls, vendors beckoning for customers, the usual Sunday bustle of a small town. "Listen," said Paloma, "and remember the story with the Moreno family 3 years ago? They too fell for some investment pyramid scheme. They were promised gold, and in the end they lost all their savings and still owed the bank. I remembered the story. Carlos Moreno worked as a bus driver, and his wife Maria was a saleswoman in a clothing store. They invested their savings in a company that supposedly dealt in real estate in Europe. 6 months later, the company disappeared, and Moreno had to sell the house to pay off his debts." "Yes, I remember," I nodded. Carlos was still working 2 jobs to make ends meet. They were smart people, and they'd lived in the world for a long time. "Exactly," Paloma agreed. "Scammers are getting more and more sophisticated. Beautiful websites, offices, documents, everything looks solid. But in reality, it's just a way of taking money from gullible people." We sat on the bench for a while longer, watching the market life. An elderly Senora Garcia was haggling with a fruit seller over the price of oranges. A young mother was buying toys for her twins. A group of teenagers were choosing CDs from a music vendor. A normal, measured life, far removed from the world of fast money and risky investments. "You know," I said, "I need to consult someone who knows finance better than we do." "And who can I go to?" Paloma asked. I thought for a few seconds. There weren't many people with an economics degree in our town. Most people worked in factories, in the service sector, or in municipal offices. But then I thought of Ruben Castillo. "There is one person," I said. "Ruben Castillo. Remember him? He was an accountant at a fish processing plant. Then he worked for the municipality, and now he's in private practice. He helps people with taxes and financial planning." "Yes, of course I remember." Paloma got excited. "A serious man, always neatly dressed. His wife works in the library. Does he do investment advice?" "I'm not sure, but he certainly knows more about finance than I do. It's worth asking his opinion on this Alpha Invest." We said goodbye to Paloma at the entrance to the market. My friend went home to make dinner for her family, and I decided to walk around the city. I needed to think about how to approach Ruben to ask for counseling. We'd known each other for years, but we hadn't been close. Our paths crossed mostly at social events or shopping. Ruben Castillo lived in a nice neighborhood, in a private home with a small garden. He was about 58 years old and a widower. His wife had died of cancer a few years ago. After her death, Ruben had retired from municipal service and started his own accounting firm. He was said to be doing well, with plenty of clients. I remembered him helping my neighbor with her tax returns a couple of years ago. Senora Vasquez was delighted with his professionalism and honesty. Ruben not only got the paperwork right, but also explained to the woman how to avoid similar problems in the future. On Monday morning after school, I decided to visit Ruben. His office was located in a small building in the center of town, on the 2nd floor above a stationery store. I walked up the narrow stairs and knocked on the door with a sign that read, "R. Castillo Financial Services." "Come in," came a voice from inside. Ruben's office was simply but tastefully furnished. A large desk, bookshelves with reference books and codes, a computer, a small couch for clients. Diplomas and certificates of advanced training hung on the walls. Ruben himself was sitting at the desk, studying some documents. When I arrived, he stood up and said hello politely. Ruben was a short man of sturdy build, with neatly trimmed gray hair and attentive brown eyes. He was dressed, as always, impeccably. White shirt, dark suit, pinstripe tie. "Senora Amelia, what a pleasant surprise," he said, pointing to the chair in front of the table. "Please have a seat. What can I do for you?" I sat down and took out an Alpha Invest brochure from my bag. Ruben listened attentively to my story about my son's plans, not interrupting me and nodding occasionally. When I finished, he took the brochure and began to study it carefully. "Interesting," he murmured, flipping through the pages. "Very interesting, and very familiar." "Familiar in what way?" I asked. "In the sense that I've seen this kind of material before. Not from this particular company, but the layout, the presentation of information, the promises, all very similar to classic pyramid schemes." Ruben put the brochure aside and looked at me seriously. "Amelia, I want to ask you a few questions. First, do you know what the average return on the world stock market has been over the last 20 years? I shook my head. "About 7 or 8% a year," Ruben explained. "That's based on the American Market Index, which is considered one of the most stable and profitable. The largest investment funds in the world, managing trillions of dollars, rarely return more than 15% a year. And here they promise 35% in 6 months. That is 70% a year." I was beginning to see where he was going with this. "Second," Ruben continued, "pay attention to the wording in the brochure. It says guaranteed, secured, guaranteed return, everywhere. But any honest financial advisor will tell you that there are no guaranteed returns in investments. There are only different levels of risk." He opened a brochure on the company information page. "Look, it says here that the company was founded in the year 2022, so it's only 2 years old. You can't build a serious reputation in the investment world in such a short period of time, and you can buy pictures of the offices and employees from any photo bank." Ruben turned on his computer and opened an internet browser. "Let's try to find information about this company online." He typed the name Alpha Invest into a search engine and began to study the results. Most of the links led to advertising sites and forums where people were discussing money-making opportunities. The company's official website was not in the first search results. "Suspicious," Ruben said. "A serious investment company should have a well-designed website with detailed information about licenses, audits, and financial statements." He continued his search and found several complaints on forums. People wrote that Alpha Invest had stopped answering calls and paying the promised profits. True, these reports concerned a different country, but the name of the company was the same. "You see?" Ruben said, pointing to the screen. "There are already negative reports. Perhaps this scheme has already gone bankrupt elsewhere and is now opening under the same name here." I felt my insides clench. If Ruben is right, then Esteban and Jimena are really falling into a scammer's trap. "What would you advise me to do?" I asked. Ruben leaned back in his chair and thought, "It's a difficult question. Your son is an adult. He has the right to make his own decisions. But as a mother, you can try to warn him. Show him this information we found. Explain the basics of investing." He printed out some pages from forums where people were complaining about Alpha Invest and gave them to me. "Take this, and I'll also write you a brief note on how to identify a pyramid scheme. The main signs are as follows: unrealistically high returns, guarantees of profit, aggressive advertising, lack of detailed information about the company's activities, pressure on clients to make quick decisions." Ruben took out a blank sheet of paper and started writing. "Another important point is the payout structure. In pyramids, the first clients actually receive the promised profit at the expense of new depositors' money. This creates the illusion of success and attracts more people. But when the flow of new clients dries up, the scheme collapses and most people lose money." I listened carefully to Ruben's explanations, trying to memorize all the details. His words sounded convincing and logical, unlike the beautiful promises in the Alpha Invest brochure. "Thank you very much," I said when Ruben had finished writing the brief. "How much do I owe you for the consultation?" "You don't owe anything," he smiled. "It was a friendly conversation, not a formal counseling session. I just hope I can help your family avoid financial loss." I thanked Ruben again and said goodbye. As I left his office, I felt a mixture of gratitude and anxiety. On the one hand, I now had a strong argument against investing in Alpha Invest. On the other hand, I realized that it would not be easy to convince Esteban and Jimena. They had already set their minds on getting rich quick and were unlikely to want to listen to warnings. Wednesday was a particularly difficult day at school. All day, I couldn't concentrate on my lessons, constantly thinking about the upcoming conversation with my son. In my briefcase were the documents Ruben Castillo had given me, printouts from forums, his handwritten note on the signs of pyramid schemes, and several articles from financial publications about fraudulent schemes. I reread them during recess, preparing for the talk. On the morning of 7th grade, we were going over the topic of percentages and proportions. As I explained to the kids what 30% profit meant, I couldn't help but think of Esteban's plans. If a bank deposit yielded 5% a year, the promise of 35% in 6 months seemed absurd, but it was harder to explain it to my adult son than to school children. During my lunch break, I walked into the teacher's lounge, where colleagues were discussing the upcoming performance review. Maria Enriquez, a history teacher, was talking about the new requirements of the Ministry of Education. Normally, I would be interested in such conversations, but today I was barely listening. My thoughts kept returning to the Alpha Invest brochure and Ruben's warnings. In my last 8th grade class, I noticed that the students were looking at me with curiosity. Apparently, my anxiety was visible from the sidelines. Marisa Contreras, the same girl who was going through family problems, even asked if I was okay. I assured the children that everything was fine, but I myself realized that I was not hiding my anxiety well. When Pedro Maria couldn't solve a simple equation, I overreacted, which was unusual for me. After class, I stayed in my office, reviewing the 5th grade quizzes on fractions. Usually this work calmed me down. Simple tasks, understandable mistakes that can be corrected. But today, even children's mistakes in calculations reminded me of how easily people can be fooled by beautiful numbers. Ana Vasquez, the school's vice principal, peeked into my office around 5 p.m. "Amelia, are you still here? You usually leave early." "I'm just finishing checking my work," I replied, not lifting my head from my notebooks. Anna came into the office and sat down on the chair across from my desk. "Is something wrong? You seem distracted today." I put down my red pen and looked at my colleague. We had worked together for 12 years, and Anna knew me well. There was no use hiding my condition from her. "Family problems," I admitted. "My son and daughter-in-law are about to do something very unwise financially." "Do you want to talk about it?" I told Anna the story of Alpha Invest without going into details. The head teacher listened attentively, shaking her head occasionally. "I understand your concern," she said when I was finished. "But you know it's almost impossible to change the minds of adult children, especially if they've already made up their minds." "I know, but as a mother, I can't just stand by and watch them go down the road to disaster." After class, I stayed at school longer than usual, checking notebooks and preparing for tomorrow's lessons. In reality, I was just procrastinating about going to see Esteban. Anna left around 6:30, wishing me luck in talking to my son. The school was getting quieter and quieter, with only the janitors walking the hallways with their carts. At 6:45, I finally gathered my courage, picked up my bag of papers, and headed for the exit. Ramon, the guard, was sitting at the entrance with a thermos of tea and a newspaper. He looked up at me. "You were late today, Señora Amelia." "Yes, a lot of work," I replied, buttoning my coat. "Take care. It's getting dark early." It took 5 minutes to get to the bus stop. The evening was cool but windless. Several people were already standing at the bus stop, workers from the nearby factory, women with bags from the store, students with backpacks. The bus came 10 minutes later, as usual. The drive to the neighborhood where my son and daughter-in-law lived took the usual 20 minutes, but it seemed to me that the time stretched on endlessly. I sat at the window and watched the evening life of the city. People were hurrying home after work. Lights were on in the store windows, and small queues were gathering at the bus stops. The usual picture of a weekday evening. I rehearsed in my head what I would say to Esteban, how I would explain to him the dangers of the planned investment. I had to be careful not to push him too hard, or he might shut down and stop listening to me altogether. At the same time, the documents from Ruben were convincing enough to make any reasonable person think twice. The bus brought me to a familiar stop, and I walked slowly down the street toward my son's house. This neighborhood had been developed 10 years ago, specifically for young families. 3-story gray brick buildings, small yards with playgrounds, parking lots. The architecture was simple, but not ugly. For a starting family, it was quite the place. The evening was cool, but clear. On the playground, toddlers played under the supervision of their parents. A few teenagers were skateboarding near the front of the house, the usual peaceful picture of evening life in a bedroom neighborhood. As I climbed the stairs to the second floor, I heard the sound of the TV coming from Esteban's apartment. So someone was home. I paused in front of the door for a few seconds, gathering my thoughts. I had my cell phone in my pocket, so I could call and let them know I was coming. But something told me it was better to come unannounced, or they might find an excuse to postpone the conversation. I rang the doorbell and got ready for the meeting. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps, then the door opened, and Jimena appeared on the threshold. My sister-in-law was dressed in home clothes, dark blue sports pants and a loose gray t-shirt with the logo of some university. Her hair was carelessly gathered into a ponytail, her face without makeup. Apparently, she'd been home for hours and hadn't been expecting guests. When she saw me, her face expressed surprise, which quickly changed to wariness. "Amelia, good evening," she said discreetly. "We weren't expecting you. Is something the matter?" "Good evening, Jimena. I'm sorry to drop in unannounced. May I come in? I need to talk to you and Esteban." Jimena hesitated for a moment, clearly considering whether to let me in. Then she stepped aside to let me into the hallway. "Esteban's not here yet. He got held up at work. Said he'd be here by 8. Come into the living room." I undressed and walked into the familiar room. There were some papers on the coffee table, which Jimena hastily collected and put into a folder. The TV screen was showing the evening news. The sound was muted. Jimena turned off the TV and sat across from me with her arms crossed over her chest. "What did you want to discuss?" she asked, not offering me tea or coffee as she usually did. "It's about your plans to invest in Alpha Invest. I've been making inquiries about the company and have learned some disturbing things." Jimena's face became even more wary. "What inquiries? From whom?" "I consulted with Ruben Castillo. He's a financial expert. He studied your brochure and found information about this company on the internet." "And what did he say?" There was a touch of irony in Jimena's voice. I took out a folder with documents from my bag and put it on the table. "Ruben thinks that Alpha Invest is a pyramid scheme. They don't have the necessary licenses. The promises of profits are unrealistic, and there are already complaints about this company in other countries." Jimena took some printouts and ran her eyes over them. Her face expressed skepticism and irritation. "Amelia," she said, putting the papers aside, "since when did school teachers become investment experts? And this Castillo of yours, who is he? A provincial accountant who spends his life counting the petty expenses of the local shopkeepers." The sharpness of her tone surprised me. Usually Jimena was polite, though restrained, when talking to me. Now she spoke almost aggressively. "Jimena, Ruben Castillo has a degree in economics and a lot of experience in finance. He's what?" My sister-in-law interrupted me. "If he was such an expert, would he be living in our small town? Real financial geniuses work in the capital, in big banks and investment companies." I felt the indignation beginning to boil inside me, but I tried to stay calm. "Jimena, this is not about who is right and who is wrong. It's about the fact that you're going to risk a lot of money. If something goes wrong, you could lose your apartment." "Nothing will go wrong." Jimena got up from the couch and started pacing around the room. "We have scrutinized all the materials. Esteban works in a bank. He understands finances better than any provincial accountant. But even bank specialists can make mistakes." "Amelia." Jimena stopped in front of me and looked into my eyes. "I understand your fears, but you must understand one simple thing. We are young, ambitious people. We don't want to spend our lives in this small apartment, counting every peso." She pointed to the window. "Look around you. This bedroom community, these paneled houses, these boring courtyards. Is this the only life we deserve? I have talent. Esteban has education and ambition. Why should we limit ourselves? There was a passion in her words that both delighted and alarmed me. Jimena was indeed a smart and talented girl, but her ambition seemed disconnected from reality. I'm not saying you should limit yourself, I replied, but there are sensible ways to improve your situation, and there are ventures that can lead to disaster. Adventures? Jimena laughed, but the laughter sounded unpleasant. Amelia, with respect for your age and experience, but you represent a generation that fears any kind of change. You're used to stability, to small paychecks, to a life without risk. She sat back down on the couch and leaned toward me. The modern world requires courage. Those who are afraid to take risks stay down, and those who are willing to take action rise to the top. We don't want to live our whole lives like— She hesitated, but then she continued, as simple teachers and bank clerks. The last words sounded especially painful. I realized that Jimena meant not only my profession, but also my lifestyle, my income level, my social status. In her eyes, I was a representative of losers who had resigned themselves to mediocrity. Jimena, I said, trying to control my voice, I'm not against you striving for the best, but this investment may turn out to be a sham. Look at the documents Ruben brought. I've already looked at them, my sister-in-law said. Some gossip from forums, opinions of people who don't understand anything about modern financial technology. This is not evidence, but prejudice. At that moment, we heard the sound of keys in the lock. Esteban had returned from work. Jimena quickly got up and went to greet her husband. I could hear their muffled conversation in the hallway, but I couldn't make out the words. A few minutes later, my son entered the living room. Esteban looked tired after the day's work, but a smile appeared on his face when he saw me. Mom, hi. I didn't expect to see you. Is something wrong? Hello, son. I came to talk to you about your investment plans. I have some information you need to know. Esteban took off his jacket, loosened his tie, and sat down next to his wife. Jimena briefly told him about my visit and the documents from Ruben. I could see my son's face growing more and more tense. Mom, he said when his wife finished, I appreciate your concern, but we've already made our decision. What's more, we signed the papers at the bank today. The loan has been approved. My heart dropped. What kind of loan? A loan secured by the apartment for $10,000, Esteban answered. We decided to increase the amount of the investment. With an investment of $10,000, Alpha Invest guarantees 35% profit. Esteban, I got up from the couch, please look at these documents. Ruben Castillo found information that this company has already defrauded people in other countries. My son took the folder and began to look through the contents. Jimena sat next to him, occasionally commenting on what he was reading. I watched the expression on Esteban's face, trying to see if he was impressed by the evidence presented. Mom, he finally said, it's all very vague. Complaints from anonymous internet users, opinions of people who probably just don't understand the terms of the investment. But Ruben explained to me the signs of pyramid schemes, I insisted. Everything that Alpha Invest promises corresponds exactly to these signs. Mom, Jimena got up from the couch, and I could see that her patience was running out. We already discussed this half an hour ago. Your Castillo is a provincial accountant who has never dealt with serious investments in his life. But he has specialized training. What kind of education? Jimena interrupted me, and her voice got louder. A diploma from a provincial institute from 20 years ago? Amelia, the world has changed. What was impossible 20 years ago is now commonplace. Esteban tried to intervene. Jimena, don't raise your voice. No, Esteban. Daughter-in-law turned to her husband. I'm tired of it. Your mother is always sticking her nose into our affairs. First she tells us how to spend our money, then she tells us what to invest in. Amelia, since when did school teachers become investment experts? You've spent your whole life earning a meager salary, living in the same house you did 20 years ago, taking public transportation. And yet you advise us on how to make money? Jimena's words hurt more than I expected. There was a grain of truth in them that made them especially painful. Jimena, I'm just worried about you, I said quietly. I don't want you to lose the apartment. We're not going to lose it, shouted the daughter-in-law. We'll earn enough money to buy a house 3 times bigger. But to do that, you have to act, not sit around and dread every step of the way. Esteban stood up and put his hand on his wife's shoulder. Jimena, calm down. Mom wants what's best. What's best? Jimena pulled away from her husband. Esteban, don't you understand? She wants us to stay like her, poor, cautious, content with little. The last word sounded like a slap in the face. I felt tears coming to my throat, but I tried to hold it back. I'm not poor, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I have savings from my husband, and I'm helping you pay the mortgage. Yes, you are, Jimena laughed harshly and unpleasantly. $300 a month. Do you know what that is for normal people? It's the price of one dinner in a nice restaurant in the capital. Jimena. Esteban tried to stop his wife, but she continued. Amelia, you are too poor to have a say in our family's finances. You don't understand how successful people live because you've never been successful. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Esteban looked at his wife with horror, and I felt everything shatter inside. Jimena stood in front of me, breathing heavily, her face flushed with anger. Jimena, you've gone too far, Esteban said quietly. No, I haven't, cut off her sister-in-law. I told the truth that should have been told long ago. I am the mistress of this house, and I will decide what we do with our money. She pointed to the door. And if anyone doesn't like our decisions, they can stop coming here with their advice. There was a heavy silence. Esteban stood in the middle of the room, not knowing what to say. Jimena was breathing heavily, looking at me defiantly. And I slowly gathered my papers into a folder. I wanted to answer, to defend myself, to explain that I was acting in good faith. But the words wouldn't come. All I could do at that moment was maintain my dignity. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and headed for the exit. In the hallway, I put on my coat, feeling my hands shaking with excitement. Esteban came out after me. Mom, wait. I turned to my son. His eyes showed confusion and shame, but he didn't say anything that would change the situation. Goodbye, Esteban, I said quietly, and left the apartment. As I walked down the stairs, I heard a loud conversation between the couple upstairs, but I didn't listen. It was already dark outside, and the cool evening air helped me regain my senses. As I approached the bus stop, I reflected on what had happened. Jimena had shown her true colors, an ambitious, selfish girl who thinks the world owes her something. And Esteban. Esteban chose his wife's side even when she publicly humiliated his mother. The bus arrived 10 minutes later, but it felt like I'd been waiting forever. All the way home, I stared out the window at the lights of the city and wondered what would happen next. Thursday started as usual. I woke up at 7:30 in the morning, as I had for years. My biological clock worked more accurately than any alarm clock. 30 years of school schedules had accustomed my body to a strict regimen. But today, I was in no hurry to get up. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying in my head yesterday's conversation with Jimena. Her daughter-in-law's words still echoed in my ears. You are too poor to have a say in our family's finances. The phrase was cruel not only in form, but also in substance. Jimena had made it clear that she considered my help insignificant and my opinion inauthentic. I got out of bed, brewed some coffee, and sat by the kitchen window. It was drizzling light rain outside the window, gray clouds hanging low over the city. The weather matched the mood. I thought about what to do next. Esteban hadn't defended me from his wife's insults. Moreover, he supported her decision to make a risky investment. It appeared that both of them considered my concern intrusive and my support insufficient. Around 8 in the morning, I called the school and informed the head teacher, Anna, that I wasn't feeling well and wouldn't be able to teach the lessons. This wasn't entirely true. Physically, I was healthy, but emotionally I felt broken and realized that I would not be able to work with the children properly. Anna was understanding and promised to find a replacement. At 9:30, I got dressed and headed to the bank. The Banco Estado branch was in the city center, a 20-minute walk from my house. I usually took the bus there, but today I decided to walk. I needed time to think about my upcoming conversation with the bank teller. The rain intensified, and I opened my umbrella. The streets were almost empty. The workday had just begun, the stores hadn't opened yet, and only the cafes were preparing breakfast for the office workers. My footsteps sounded deafening on the wet pavement. Several times I stopped, doubting the right decision. But Jimena's words kept me on my toes. The bank opened at exactly 9 in the morning. I was one of the first customers. The spacious hall was brightly lit, quiet music was playing, and coffee smelled from the machine in the corner. Behind the counters sat young employees in uniforms, ready to work. The atmosphere was businesslike and relaxed. I approached the information window where a young woman of about 25 with neat hair and a friendly smile was sitting. "Good morning, Senora. What can I do for you?" "I need to change the terms of automatic transfer of funds," I said, taking out of my bag documents. "Sure. Go to the manager. Third window on the right." The manager was a middle-aged man named Carlos Henriquez. He scrutinized my documents and entered the data into the computer. "Senora Valdez, I see that you have set up a monthly automatic transfer of $300 to your son's account to pay off the mortgage. Do you want to change the amount?" "No, I want to cancel those transfers completely." Carlos raised his head from the monitor and looked at me with surprise. "Cancel completely? Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm absolutely sure. I understand. I'll need to file the appropriate paperwork. But I must warn you, if the auto payment was set up as a guarantee of the borrower's solvency, then canceling it may create problems with the bank that issued the mortgage." I hadn't thought about that aspect. Perhaps my transfers did factor into the calculation of Esteban's creditworthiness, but I didn't care about that now. "Cancel it anyway," I said firmly. Carlos shrugged and started filling out the forms. The procedure took about 20 minutes. I had to sign a few signatures, show my passport, and get copies of the documents. The whole time I was thinking about how Esteban and Jimena would react when they found out about my decision. "It's done," Carlos finally said. "Automatic transfers have been canceled as of today. The last payment was made on the 1st of this month." "Thank you," I replied, tucking the documents into my bag. "Senora Valdez?" The manager leaned across the table to me. "I'm sorry for the personal question, but is everything okay with your family? People don't usually cancel help for relatives without a good reason." "I'm fine," I answered briefly. "They just don't need my help anymore." As I left the bank, I felt a strange sense of relief. The decision had been made and realized. Now Esteban and Jimena would indeed become completely independent in financial matters, as they had wanted. The rain had almost stopped, and there were gaps in the clouds, with sunlight streaming through. I walked home slowly, stopping at the store and pharmacy on the way. I had to buy food for dinner and medicine for my headache. There was a pharmacist I knew, Senora Montes, who asked me how I felt. "Just tired," I replied. "It's a tough school year, and the kids are harder." "I understand," Senora Montes nodded. "My daughter is a teacher too, and she always complains about the workload. The children of today are not what they used to be." At the store, I bought vegetables for soup, bread, and milk. The clerk, who had known me for years, noticed that I looked sad. I joked back, citing the overcast weather. People in a small town are used to taking an interest in each other's lives, but today I didn't feel like sharing my problems with anyone. At home, I made a light lunch and sat down with a book in the living room. I read a novel by a contemporary Chilean writer about a woman who starts a new life after a divorce. The story was sad, but inspiring at the same time. The heroine overcame difficulties and found the strength to move on. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rang. Jimena's name popped up on the display. I stared at the ringing machine, wondering if I should answer it. Finally, I picked up the phone. "Amelia!" My sister-in-law's voice sounded tense. "What's going on?" "The bank has informed Esteban that the automatic mortgage transfer has been canceled." "Good afternoon, Jimena," I answered calmly. "Yes, I canceled the transfers this morning." "How could you?" "We were counting on that money. We have expenses planned." "Yesterday you said I was too poor to have a say in your financial matters. I thought about it and decided you were right. If my opinion doesn't matter, you don't need my help." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Jimena spoke again, in a different tone. "Amelia, I was upset yesterday. Perhaps I said too much, but you realize that without your translations, it will be very difficult for us. If it gets hard, you'll find a way to cope. I thought you said you were young and ambitious. Prove it." "But we've already signed the loan papers. We were counting on your help to continue." Then you shouldn't have insulted me, I replied in the same calm tone. I'm sorry, Jimena, but I've made my decision. Goodbye. I hung up the phone before I even finished my answer. My hands were trembling slightly from excitement, but in my heart, I felt the rightness of what was happening. For too long, I'd tolerated neglect. For too long, I'd kept silent when I'd been humiliated. Half an hour later, Esteban called. His son's voice sounded confused and worried. Mom, what's wrong? Why did you cancel the transfers? Hello, Esteban. I canceled them because you don't need them anymore. Yesterday, Jimena made it clear that my help was insignificant and my opinion inauthentic. Mom, she was upset. You shouldn't take it so personally. Son, your wife called me too poor to have a say in your family, and you stood there and didn't say a word. So that's what you both think. That's not true. I just didn't want to escalate the conflict. I understand, but the decision has been made. You are now free to manage your finances as you wish. Mom, please, let's meet and talk calmly. We can work this out. I don't think that's gonna help. You're adults. Make your own decisions. What about the mortgage? Without your money, we'll have to increase the monthly payment or extend the term of the loan. That's your problem, Esteban. You wanted to invest $10,000 to make more money, so earn more. But we haven't gotten that money yet. Investments are for the future. Then reconsider your plans, or ask Jimena's parents for a loan. Esteban was silent. His wife's parents were not wealthy people. Her father worked as a cab driver, her mother worked in a small store. They barely made ends meet and could not help their son financially. Mom, Esteban finally said, I understand that you're hurt, but are you really ready to jeopardize our apartment because of one quarrel? I'm not jeopardizing anything. You're the one who decided to take out a home equity loan for a dubious investment. I warned you of the danger, but you wouldn't listen to me. Okay, let's say you were right about Alpha Invest, but what does that have to do with mortgages? It's not the same thing. To me, it's the same thing. Your disrespect for my opinion. If I'm too stupid to understand investments, why do you need my money? The conversation went on for a few more minutes. Esteban tried to persuade me, explaining that they could reconsider the investment plans, that Jimena was ready to apologize. But I was adamant. Eventually, my son said goodbye, promising to call back tomorrow. After the conversation, I turned off the sound on my phone. I needed to be alone, to think about what had happened. I made myself tea with lemon and honey, my favorite remedy for stress since childhood. Sitting by the window with a cup in my hands, I watched the life on the street. Opposite the house, old Senora Gomez was watering the flowers on her balcony. Below, in the courtyard, children played soccer with a homemade ball made of rags. Teenagers sat on a bench, talking animatedly about something, the ordinary, measured life of a small town, far from the world of big money and risky deals. My phone was blinking red, missed calls, but I wasn't going to take them. I needed peace today. I picked up my book and tried to continue reading, but my thoughts kept returning to the family conflict. In the evening, when it was dark outside, I made a simple dinner of vegetable soup and a cheese sandwich. I ate slowly, thinking about the future. My relationship with my son had deteriorated, perhaps for a long time, but I didn't regret the decision. For too long, I'd allowed myself to be treated without proper respect. After dinner, I turned on the TV and watched the evening news. They were talking about the problems of the economy, rising prices, and the difficulties of small business. Nothing new. The same problems that had plagued the country for years. On the screen appeared a story about fraudsters who deceived pensioners by promising high returns on investments. I smiled bitterly. How relevant it sounded today. As I went to bed, I thought about having to go to school tomorrow and teach lessons as if nothing had happened. The kids shouldn't have to suffer from my family problems. I had to pull myself together and keep working. After all, school had always been not only a job for me, but also a refuge from the hardships of life.